Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta Ndlela. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. Communication and soft skills are crucial for your career growth and leadership development. And by the end of this episode, please log on to Apple and Spotify and leave us a rating and a review. Now let's get communicating with Nick Hutchison joining us from Boston. Did you attend the Boston Tea Party? I'm kidding. Joining
Well, I'm
us
excited to be here. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction, Roberta.
my absolute pleasure. Welcome, Nick. Thank you for being here. Please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, my name is Nick Hutchison, and I'm from the Boston, Massachusetts area. I was born and raised up here in the Northeast, but I've traveled around quite a bit. I did live closer to you down in Florida for a little while, and I've bounced around internationally as well. So, I'm well traveled, but Boston is home.
That's beautiful. And when you say that you also travel internationally, what have you found as some lessons, so to speak, from your travels?
Well, outside of personal development books, I do believe that international travel, especially to a country where the primary language is not one that you're familiar with, I think
Mhm.
it's one of the greatest opportunities for growth. And so I've spent a lot of time in Central and South America in countries that primarily speak Spanish. And I'm always forced to embrace discomfort and think on my feet. And yeah, I've learned quite a bit doing that actually.
Mhm. Very key skills that we highlight, especially since the pandemic. There's a lot of changes, even in the workplace. The adaptability, thinking on your feet, skills that you don't particularly learn at university. You just learn your technical skill, and mostly that's it.
Yeah, yeah, very true. And also body language, I think, is incredibly important when you can't speak verbally. So I've had entire experiences where I'd like to go to a restaurant, sit down and have a meal, but I can't communicate with the host or the waiters, the wait staff. So, you can, hey, two people sitting outside, here's what I'd like
Mhm.
on the menu. I'm ready for the check, right? So you learn all sorts of skill sets as far as communication is concerned when you can't verbalize what you're intending to do.
Yes, at the end of the day, they say verbal is only 7%, right, of communication. The rest is body
Hmm.
language, the tone, and things like that. So you are the founder of BookThinkers, and you just authored your book, Rise of the Reader. Were you, as a child, that much in love with books?
No, I was not. So when I was growing up, I was more of the athlete stereotype, not really much of the academic. And so when I was younger, you couldn't pay me to read a book. And that sort of know it all, focus on athletics type behavior continued with me through most of my college experience as well. But when I was going into my senior year of college, I took a sales internship at a local software company. And my boss at the time, Kyle, I think he recognized some unfulfilled potential in this 20-year-old kid who thought he was on top of the world. And so he actually recommended that I listen to business style podcasts on my way to and from the office. I was commuting about an hour each way 5 days a week, so 10 hours in the car. And he
Mm.
said something along the lines of, hey, Nick, listening to the same radio station or the same playlist, the same music playlist for the 1000th time, it's not going to get you closer to where you want to be in life. But the right podcast might. You should check out some of these shows. So I started listening to these podcasts where successful people were being interviewed. And very quickly, I realized that leaders are readers. So many of these people gave at
Mm.
least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading. And so I just had a realization one day. If I'd like to live up to my potential, I better check out some of these books. And so that's what I did.
Right.
And the rest is history. For the last 10 years, I've been reading 50, 60, 70 books a year on average.
Wow. Leaders are readers. We're gonna hashtag that. But
Yes.
the thing, but the highlight of that is the thing is, now that you mention it, I don't remember a single guest I've had previously on the show where, whether they are a leader themselves or they coach leaders, they would mention about 2 or 3 books on the show if they haven't authored one themselves.
Right.
But a lot of the time, they attribute a lot of their success to a certain book they read, or if they quote something, it's because they read this book and how they improved their leadership style.
Absolutely. Yeah. Books are so interesting because they condense decades of somebody else's lived experience and greatest life lessons into days of consumption. So there's almost no better shortcut, right? I mean, it would
Mm.
cost a lot of money to get the world's best communication coach, but you can access their book for $20 and read it and apply it for a few hours of your time. I mean, it's like the greatest life hack that there ever was. And so that's why I was so surprised when I first started reading these books that more people my age weren't talking about them, promoting them, reading them, focusing on them, socializing around them. And that's why I started my company, BookThinkers, was to connect with like-minded people and start sharing the lessons that I was getting from these amazing books.
Well, all credit to your mentor, Kyle. You said his name, Ross, right?
Kyle, yes.
Yes, because here's the thing, especially this generation, look at all the distractions, all the tech that takes them away from reading. Because I grew up when, before cell phones were invented, TV started at 6 p.m. and ended at midnight. So during the day, there was no TV. So we had to find something to do. If we're not playing, we're reading something from school, even if you're doing homework. But now look at all these distractions that take this generation away from books. So, in a way, unless somebody brings it to their attention like you are, nobody's going to particularly tell them and say, hey, when last did you read a book to help
Yeah.
develop this skill, or help be a better person and things like that?
Yeah, it's so very true. And I'm trying to make it fun again. You know, it's one of my missions here because I do believe that books have a very unique ability to help us solve problems, develop skills, satisfy curiosity. And there's so much importance in the physical paper book because, like you mentioned, it is monotasking as opposed to multitasking. And it's delaying gratification as opposed to instant gratification swiping all day long.
Mhm.
So I've developed the ability to focus for extended periods of time simply by reading personal development books. I mean, it's a byproduct of the process, and I think it's important to develop that ability to focus in any area of professional expertise or whatever industry you're in. It doesn't matter. The ability to focus is a skill set that can help you win in life.
That is such a critical skill. I have art teacher friends who talk about how kids are actually being disadvantaged now when they come to school because of the swiping all the time. They sit in
Yeah.
restaurants and mom wants to eat and dad wants to eat and you're going to be a distraction. Let's give you an iPad. And they cannot focus for longer than 30 seconds because that's how the programming of technology does to them, especially as young kids. And trust me, there's so many benefits to technology, but that thing of learning to stick to one thing, and now kids get bored so quickly
I
and they
know.
want to do something else and something else 5 minutes later and something different 5 minutes later. They don't know how to have that longevity of a concentration span.
Yeah, it's very true. I talk a lot in my book, Rise of the Reader, about the importance of delaying gratification.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with the Stanford marshmallow experiment?
No, please tell us about it.
This group of researchers, they took a group of kids and
Or
they
the ones that
placed,
give marshmallows and say, "I'll give you more if you if you
yeah,
don't
if you
eat
can
it."
wait.
Oh, right.
Yeah, if you
Yes.
can wait
Please go
15
ahead.
minutes, right? And so then they were able to follow those kids throughout the rest of their lives, essentially the next 20, 30 years. And the kids that could delay gratification and be rewarded with a second marshmallow or pretzel, they were healthier, they were happier, they were wealthier. And so the ability to delay gratification and to say, hey, I'd like to serve my future self. I'm going to give up some present moment dopamine, right? Scrolling all day long or watching Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to learn something that might seem a little dull in the moment. It's not as exciting, but I know it will serve me in the future. And that's a very important thing to wrap our head around because sometimes people will tell me, Roberta, they'll say, hey, Nick, I'm not much of a reader. I don't have time to read books. And I'll say, well, hold on a second. If I was to pay you $10,000 to read a book by the end of the month, do you think you could do it? And they'd say, well, of course.
Yeah.
So you've fallen into my trap. It's not a question of whether or not we can read. It's a question of whether or not we value reading enough to prioritize it over Netflix and scrolling and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, I think it's a very important skill set because again, like sometimes I'll joke around with people. I'm 29 years old, but if you include all of the books that I've read behind me, right, the books that condense decades of valuable experience into days of reading, I'm thousands of years old. And so I think it's
Mm.
a great way to get ahead in life. It's not as fun, maybe, as video games or something, but it sure is useful. I believe that.
Hence, they'll only do it if you pay them 10 grand. Here's
Yes.
the thing. The thing about delaying gratification, as you said in the Stanford marshmallow experiment, I did not have a title for it, but yes, when you started, I remembered, is that the delaying gratification, it's similar to opening a business. Do you know how many of us give up because within the first however long we thought it should make money by now and I should quit
Mhm.
my job. And then if it doesn't, you said, I'm done, I'm going back to my job, or whatever it is that we start. We have we have become accustomed to not seeing things through for the long haul because
Yeah.
we've become accustomed to not delaying gratification as much.
Yeah, it's so true. In Michael Gerber's book, The E Myth Revisited, which is a great book on small business and systems, he
Mm.
says that 95% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years. And it's because of that reason. You run out of money. You thought it was going to happen faster than it did or than it was going to. And I remember when I was first starting BookThinkers, my agency, now we have 10 people on the team. We serve hundreds of authors a year. But when I was first starting, I wanted to quit my full-time job and go into it. And I had a mentor at the time. He said, "Hey, Nick, 95% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years because they run out of money. Don't jump and then try to build the parachute on the way down because you'll operate from a place of scarcity and that scarcity will bleed into your decision making." So he said, "Nick, instead, build the parachute and then jump." And what he meant by that was if you build an emergency fund and you start to build this business, this side hustle of yours, and have it start to generate some revenue in advance of making that jump, you'll be more successful. And so, yeah, you're right. I think that on social media, we see all of these entrepreneurs who go from zero to $1 billion in a year. And it's like, oh, I can do that too. But that's not realistic, right? That's one out of a million. That's a unicorn.
Not only is it not realistic, I don't know if you do have time to even find those videos where people, because people can be FBI, CIA type of researchers online, and they think, wait a minute, I know this person, they don't have $100 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so you realize that, wait a minute, even that is an illusion. It's
sure.
great to aspire, but it's an illusion. But as you say, it fools people into thinking within 3 months you can have $1 million,
Mhm.
and therefore they don't have that. Just work at it, just, keep your job, have the emergency fund, work at it until it starts to be sustainable.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot about that, especially with the books we're reading. There's a chapter in my book, Rise of the Reader, where I talk about some of the downsides of the personal development industry because I'm a big fan. I think most people
Mm.
are good actors. They're writing books because they have something valuable to teach other people. But there are some scam artists out there, right? Some snake oil salespeople, and they'll create unrealistic titles like How to Make $1 Million in 30 Days. And
Oh no.
that's not a good expectation to set. That's an unhealthy expectation for you to set as an author. Because, I have a podcast too, and I've been
Mm.
fortunate enough to interview some very successful and wealthy people, Grant Cardone and Alex
Mm.
Hormozi and Lewis Howes and these people. And there is no
Yes.
overnight success. Not a single one of them had any success overnight. It took a long time. And we don't see that,
Longer
right?
than 90 days.
Yeah, longer than 90 days, unless you buy my course. I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. Yeah.
Oh, how many times have you heard that? Yeah, sorry, carry on, Nikki.
No, no, I'm just saying, like, you're right. It takes a long time, and so does the communication piece. I mean, it took me
Mm.
10 years to become confident in my ability to communicate with any level of precision or the ability to articulate my thoughts and feel comfortable in front of an audience. It took a long time. It doesn't happen overnight.
So you were 29. If it took you 10 years, you started around the age of 19 to start working on your communication skills?
Yes. Yes.
Usually, there are professionals who've graduated and I in business or in the workplace, and they still haven't invested the time. Why, at such a young age, did you decide I need to invest in this?
I had a lot of social anxiety when I was younger, and there are plenty of examples of this. When I was in high school, I was very insecure and I cared way too much about what other people were thinking.
Mm,
And so as a result, I shied away from raising my hand and speaking up in class or presenting in front of people. And there were a few experiences that sort of compounded that fear. One time I was in a Spanish class in high school and I was supposed to present a skit with a partner in front of the class in Spanish, and we couldn't use our notes. And I
mhm.
was so nervous. And during the skit, I was supposed to be eating a bowl of popcorn. I was so nervous. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped the bowl of popcorn in front of the class and
Oh,
I left. I just left the classroom. And I had a few other experiences like that. So by the time I went to college, I started to realize that I could reinvent myself. This was an inflection point. It was an opportunity to change the narrative. And both of my parents worked in business. My mom was in retail management, my dad was in footwear and apparel sales. And so they both had proficient communication abilities. And I
mhm,
thought, you know what, I'd like to go into business myself as well. I'm a little bit of a rebel. I don't like to fit society's box. And so I'd like to go into business. And very clearly, I had to be able to, articulate what was going on inside of my mind and communicate and sell, but I didn't have that skill set yet.
right.
So I took an internship, sort of like a job, my first 2 summers when I was in college. So 18 into 19, 19 into 20, where I ran my own house painting business.
Mm,
And I had to go door to door in my hometown and I had to sell, which was terrifying. So the company that I worked with to help me do this, they provided some sales training. And you would meet once a week with some other students that were sort of enrolled in a similar program. And
mhm,
you would talk about sales, psychology, persuasion, communication. You would build scripts. And then eventually we had to go out there and knock on doors and sell our own house painting jobs, which
mm,
was terrifying. But I knocked on at least a couple thousand doors each summer. And every single one of those door knocks was an opportunity to try something, receive feedback, make an iteration, and then go knock on the next door. And so you learn to face rejection. And I also think that through exposure, you can become desensitized to fear. And there's no better
mm.
way to get exposure than knocking on a new door every 30 seconds for 2 entire summers, right? So that was
Exactly.
one step in the right direction. But I was the worst performer out of there were probably 10 students each summer. I was the worst performer both summers in terms of sales, but I probably grew the most because I went in with the least amount of confidence.
Mm. So the sales, it's funny that you had this fear in high school and all the out of all the jobs in the world, you went into sales, which we consider one of the most difficult professions. You know
Yes,
what I mean? You
I
didn't take an easy route of, you know what, I'm just gonna go at McDonald's or Burger King. Their customers are already loyal. I don't need to tell them anything. They must just tell me what kind of burger they want. But trying to convince, trying to communicate to someone else why they should accept while you're selling is a whole other skill.
Yeah, it was a lot. I don't know that I was conscious or aware of how much I had to sell when I first signed up for this program.
Mm,
I think the marketing flyers in the cafeteria or wherever I originally grabbed it for this company, they talked about how much money you could make during the summer. And so I was very outcome focused. I was thinking, wow, I could make 10, 20, $30,000 as a college student during my summer. That's all I was focused on. And so by the time I was accepted into this program and I started to show up to these meetings, the anxiety definitely started to build. And I'll tell everybody a funny story. Well, not so
please
funny
do. Yeah,
story.
we love stories here.
I with the other group of students and my mentor at the time, we built these scripts. So I was supposed to go up and knock on a door And I was supposed to say, "Hi, my name's Nick. I'm a local college student running a house painting business to help pay for college. And I noticed that your house needs some work done. I'd love to come back this weekend and give you a free estimate as to what it would cost for my team to come out and fix everything, to paint your house."
Right.
And I was supposed to go up, and then I was taught how to handle objections and talk about my business, etc. But I remember the first time I ever went out, I had my sales mentor with me on the first day,
Mm.
and I knocked on the first house, and this woman answered, and she was nice, but she said, "Hi, how can I help you?" And I just said, I forgot everything. I just said, "Would you like an estimate?" And she was like,
Of
"Who
what?
are you? And an estimate for what?" And I was like, I turned to my boss, Kurt, and I was like, "What am I supposed to do?" And of course, she closed the door, and he's like, "All right, on to the next one. This time, why don't you remember the first couple of words you're going to say? Just introduce yourself next time. Hi, my name's Nick. What's your name?" So
Mm, mm,
repetition, feedback, iteration. And what's so funny about it is that I was able to grow from shy and insecure into more and more confident throughout those first 2 summers. And
right.
I would see that improved communication and social interactions at school and during presentations in class that I actually decided then to go for a minor in public speaking. So I
Mm.
took public speaking classes when I was at school, and they would film you. So the teacher would film your 3-minute presentation on the importance of drinking water or something like that.
Yes.
And then she would have you score yourself, and you would have to estimate right after, you'd have to, like an after action report, you would have to estimate how many verbal pauses you used in 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
we do some
um,
exercise.
uh,
Yeah.
so I would say something like, I use the word 5 times. And then you would watch the recording and you would realize you used it 35 times.
Mm.
So it was creating a sense of awareness around your ability to communicate. And all sorts of things like that I tried out. I went to Toastmasters.
Yes.
I read books on communication. I got a phone sales job with the software company. It was a lot.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about the growth part, what about rejection? What about letting go? And you said it so beautifully, letting go of the fear of rejection then brought success to your life later on.
Yeah, I was taught that every no gets you closer to a yes, and that rejection is part of the process. And if you expect rejection, it doesn't surprise you so much.
Mm.
So I was taught for every 100 doors that you knock on in a neighborhood, one person will set up an estimate with you. So you can't just guess which house it is. You have to knock on
Go
100
through
doors
a
in order to get
hundred.
one yes, right? And so every no that I received, every door that got slammed in my face, every time somebody threw out an objection that I didn't know how to handle, of course, I'm taking notes so that I can talk with the whole group of students and somebody could say, "Oh, here's how to overcome that more efficiently." But
Mm.
every no got me closer to a yes. So I knew if I knocked on 300 doors, it might be the last 3 people that say yes, but on average, 3 people will allow me to come back and present them with a quote to paint their house, right? So
Right.
it became part of the process. And when you expect it, it doesn't surprise you.
Because that's a fear that a lot of us find very challenging to overcome, and hence we either try something once and it doesn't work out, or we get rejected and we stop, or we just don't persevere enough. We don't tell ourselves it has to be 300 doors, 300 no's before we get to it. Yeah, that
Right.
um, perseverance, that determination to just keep going, just keep going. And then when you think about it in your business, you've had rejections too when you started BookThinkers.
Right. So, just to kind of wrap up this through line for everybody, I then minored in public speaking.
Hmm.
I was trying so hard to remove my verbal pauses during my late college experience and my early software sales job experience that I had my friends, if they caught me using a verbal pause, so, but like,
The filler words. Mm, mm,
they could call it out. It didn't matter where we were. We could be in the cafeteria, we could be at the bar, we could be talking to some girls. It didn't matter. if
Mm.
they called me out, I had to drop down and do 10 push-ups, which was very
Oh,
embarrassing in certain circumstances. Now I've let them creep back into my language today, but back then I was focused on growing and improving as a communicator. I then had a phone sales job, which turned into more of a regional sales position where I was flying around and making presentations. And then I started BookThinkers.
mm,
And with BookThinkers, I had to get on camera and talk about the books that I was reading, which was very nerve wracking because now thousands of people are providing feedback on your ability to communicate. And then I started a podcast, and now the business has grown and I'm making sales presentations. We just hosted our first event where I was on stage for 8 hours.
congratulations. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So it's come a long way. I would have been shocked if you had told me that back in the day. But as far as failure is concerned, I think the same lesson applies with rejection. If you expect failure as part of the process, as a learning opportunity, it doesn't surprise you. And every business has failures. BookThinkers didn't make any money for years. And I would try
Mm.
different monetization strategies and they would continue to fail. We spent at one point tens of thousands of dollars trying to build a mobile application that could help readers retain and implement more from the books they were reading,
Mm.
and it failed. So there were so many opportunities where it's I have to persevere. The road to success and the road to failure are the same road. It's just that you have to dodge a few more obstacles sometimes, jump a few more potholes in order to actually get to the successful part of the road and the journey. Most people just give up, like you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah. You have so much perseverance, and as you said, it's been a long journey. These are the stories we want to hear because they help us also persevere and know that even for years, if you don't make money, if you really believe in the work that you do, just keep going. Because we just hear, like for instance, and we would like for you to share some of the stories from your podcast where if you interview a successful person, it'll be like, oh yeah, Jeff Bezos started selling books from his garage. Within 2 years he had Amazon. Now he's the richest man in the world. There's so many missing parts we want to hear about that are never talked about.
Yeah, there really are. The first one that comes to mind is the author Steven Pressfield. He's
Mm.
the author of a few best-selling books, including The War of Art and Gates of Fire, each of which has sold well over 1 million copies. And he wrote a book that turned into a movie, The Legend of Bagger Vance, that starred
Oh,
Will
with Will
Smith. And
Smith.
yeah,
Oh.
so that was his first book. But check this out. He wrote from the age of 20 until 55 before he ever made money from his writing. So for what is that math?
35 years.
35 years straight. He worked odd jobs. He worked picking fruit on farms. He was a truck driver for a little while, worked on an oil rig, all sorts of jobs just so that he could afford to write. And for 35 years, he experienced no success.
Hmm.
And then his first book that gets picked up is The Legend of Bagger Vance at 55. Now he's 80 years old. So for the last 25 years, he's been writing. We've had the chance to interview him a few times, work with him a little bit, and he is an incredibly inspirational person. And so 35 years, I asked him about that. I said, the average person my age in their late 20s, early 30s, they want it yesterday. They're not willing to put their head down and work for 2 years, 3 years,
Oh,
never mind
at first
35.
you think, okay, 5 sounds like a good number.
Yes.
At 60 months of me pushing and this thing is not bearing fruit. Okay, I'll give it 5 years.
Craziness. But he
35.
felt called to do it. He felt this was his mission in life. And he learned a lot of lessons along the way. He has a memoir about the experience called Government Cheese, which is
Mm.
he actually drove a lot in the Southeast in Georgia, and he would deliver government subsidized food like government cheese and milk and bread as part of one of his odd jobs. And he talks about all of the crazy experiences he had, but just to get the ability to write, that's all he was focused on. 35 years.
Mm. When you believe so much in the work that you do, yes. And
Yeah.
then,
So
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, and so that's one example. I'm happy to give more, but yeah, Steven Pressfield is an amazing author.
Mm-hmm. But as I said, in your podcast, you interview these successful people, and therefore they really, just that one example, give you the story we never get to hear before they got to the success.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And those are the most valuable stories. Sometimes I think about it like this. I want to make sure that the audience feels like they can do it too, and that they understand these are just people. I mean, one thing that I've definitely learned is nothing is as fancy as it seems. None of these people are as fancy as they seem. You take Grant Cardone, for instance. Grant manages billions of dollars,
Right.
and he's in his 60s. People forget about that. 10 years ago, nobody knew who he was. In
Yeah,
his late
I found out
20s, he
about
was,
him, I think, 2 years ago.
yeah. In his
Yeah.
late 20s, he was in and out of drug rehab, alcohol,
Mm.
and he was a bum. He didn't have any money, right? In his late 20s. And then for 20 straight years, he worked his butt off, selling, improving his ability to communicate, building a brand. And now we think of 10X and the jets and the cars and all that kind of stuff. But there's a story behind that person, and it involves a lot of perseverance and a lot of failure. And I think the same thing is true for all of these people. Alex Hormozi slept on his gym floor because he couldn't
Mm.
afford to sleep anywhere else. The list goes on and on and on.
Yes, and it affects their personal lives as well. The cost is both financial, as you said, when you were starting your company and you even lost more thousands and nothing was happening. The cost is not only financial, but personal life gets affected. Some wives can't take it anymore and they leave. They think this thing you're trying to build, whose results they don't even realize or get to enjoy, they think, I can't stay for this. And so you lose your family. There's so much of a cost when you build something that you truly believe in, because it can take that long.
It can. And I've heard one of my favorite authors, and this is a good story as well, Evan Carmichael. Are you familiar with him?
Yes, he does those videos, the motivational videos on YouTube. So he just plugs, let's say he does, I don't know, Steve Harvey, and he will just get the quotes and make like a nice short video for us to just get the nuggets. Or Tony Robbins. Yeah, he does
Yeah.
those videos. I love them. Mm.
Yeah, he's the best. I've gotten to know him pretty well over the years. He's one of my mentors. And
Mm.
Evan, I think he posted for 5 years on YouTube every single day before he had any type of traction. I mean,
No
he posts the
way.
numbers sometimes. I think it's on his website, but like year 1, 10 subscribers, year 2, 40 subscribers, year
You
3,
are
200
kidding.
subscribers.
Because
Yeah.
when I found him, it was millions of views
Yeah.
and subscribers, and he's all over my feed. Wow.
And he has a great line in his book, Built to Serve, where he says, your purpose comes from your pain. And so
Mm.
when you persevere and you overcome something, that becomes your mission. You want to serve the people who haven't overcome that thing yet. And so for him, his whole thing is believe. He wants to believe in entrepreneurs. He wants to encourage people to continue to keep going, because everybody can have their share of success. It just takes a little bit longer for some of us, and a little bit more iteration. It's always changing.
Mm-hmm. And then Rise of the Reader. When did you feel inclined to write the book? Because you had been talking about books all this time.
Right. A few years ago, after probably the 500th question I was asked, I thought, you know what, I should write a book about this. So while I was building my community, now we have about 150,000 followers on Instagram. The account
Wow.
does anywhere between 500,000 to a million impressions a month organically. And so we reach a lot of readers. And as a result, we get a lot of questions. So people will say things like, hey, Nick, how do I choose the right book to solve this problem? Or, hey, Nick, how do I take effective notes while I'm reading? Hey, Nick, how do I actually use what I'm learning to create behavior change? I feel like the books go in one ear and out the other.
Mm.
And so I'm answering everybody, right? I'm of service to my community as much as I can be. But I just realized that I wish there was a resource, like a book that I could point people to that has all of the answers.
Right.
And so I decided to start writing it. And I didn't have all of those answers in a way that I could present them at first. So I almost had to observe my own behavior from a third party perspective and say, what the heck does Nick Hutchison do to read effectively and implement what he's reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I would journal about it and I would write about it. And as more questions would pour in, I would say, oh, that's a good question. I got to make sure I include that in the book. And so here we are. The book just launched on November 1st, 2023.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's Rise of the Reader: Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learn. And it's all about how we can use these books to improve our lives.
Absolutely. Applying what you learn. When I was growing up, they used to say knowledge is power, and then it changed to application of the knowledge is power.
It
Because
is
just
true.
knowing something, look at how much information is circulating. Just knowing something but not doing anything about it is not going to make a difference. It's not going to grow like you've been talking about growth.
Yeah. Napoleon Hill said, action is the real measure of intelligence. And I think that's
Mm.
true. Yeah, the application of knowledge is power, just like you mentioned. And we talked about this at the start of the show. The world's best in every area of communication, but also every area of life, right? Health, fitness, nutrition, philosophy, psychology, personal finance, business. They've all written books or had books written about them. And so you can be mentored by these incredible people for just $20 in a few hours of your time. And that's why these
Mhm.
books are so useful. Somebody has already figured it out. Now you can just read their book and use what they figured out.
And they'll take their 35-year painful journey and to a book that you can read over a weekend.
Right. What
Hmm.
are what are some of your favorite communication book recommendations?
The first one, let me see. I've read quite a few. I read a lot of more memoirs. I'll come to the public speaking books just now. I read, for some reason, I read a lot of memoirs, and there's something about memoirs for me that, because usually a person who writes a memoir, it's a snapshot of that part of their life. It's not the whole biography. When I was growing up, I used to read biographies, but something about memoirs is that the storytelling is much more detailed because they zoom in on particular experiences, and I get to understand them on a sort of more personal level because they taking me to a place where something happened and this is how they responded and this is how they interacted with the other person. Like for instance, Barbara Walters, when she wrote the memoir, her memoir, the late Barbara Walters, she it's one thing to be on TV and get given the script that you're the anchor, read this, but it takes me to sort of behind the scenes person, like the deeper part of them, because you see them at a human level and how they communicate, like I said, communicate, how they deal with things, not just the persona they present in the media. The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes, the one who's created Grey's Anatomy and a whole list of other shows, it it gave me a much better sense of who she is, way better than any interview I've ever seen on her on, which is crazy, I think, because she gets interviewed a lot. you know, but there's something about memoirs that makes me understand the real person. Then you get to understand how they see themselves, how they communicate with others, how they deal with life, why they have the outlook they have. And then when I see the media fame stuff on TV, I have a better understanding because I have that behind the scenes um, outlook, so to speak. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely are. I love biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs, especially I mean, for me, my interest is mostly in entrepreneurship. So Walter
Hmm.
Isaacson is my favorite biographer, and he's written about Steve
Right.
Jobs, Elon Musk, but also Benjamin Franklin, Leonardo da Vinci, and a few other people. And I
Hmm.
learned so much from those books. And when you think about a company like Apple, trillion-dollar company. I mean, that book has trillions of dollars of business lessons in it, and it's
Right.
available for 20, it's like that's how
I will
valuable these
buy
books
it
can be.
too. Yeah. I like a lot of Dale Carnegie material. I think that, yeah, there's a public speaking book that I had, and then influencing people, which is also communication, how to
Mhm.
influence people, and Good to Great. When I was You mentioned earlier the personal development industry. When I was growing up, which were the 80s, that's when Tony Robbins, Les Brown, Zig Ziglar, that's when we were first introduced to personal development. And Tony Robbins had an infomercial back home in South Africa where the whole day he will just be the tapes and the CDs and the books. So when he released Unleash the Power Within, I went and bought the book. I think it was like 400 pages. And I
Yeah.
was still in high school. Things like that. And also I got to see his mentor. Have you heard of Jim Rohn?
Yeah, Jim famously said you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the
You
most time
spend
with.
the time with.
Yeah.
Yes, he mentored Tony Robbins. So he came to Cape Town back home. My mom and I went to Cape Town to see him. But I got to, that was my first introduction to the self-development um, industry or era. I remember after Tony Robbins, the book that I read, which I still read even to this day, was John Kehoe, Mind Power. That was my first introduction to using your mind to create the life you want. I don't think it had been taught to me before
Hmm.
until then. So Mind Power, John Kehoe, that's why I still remember it to this day. And then uh, Napoleon Hill, you mentioned, yes. Then the positive thinking book, no, Neil Donald Walsh, sorry. Neil Donald Walsh. But yes, it's funny that a lot of the books I've read, majority of the books I've read are not purely about public speaking only.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Does that
And
make sense?
yeah, I love a lot of those people too. I've read a lot of Tony Robbins, and I've listened to a lot of Les Brown.
Mm.
I actually interviewed Brian Tracy. Have you ever read any of his books?
He
Or
was part of that crew, that
yes.
that generation. Sorry, yes, Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar.
Yeah,
Um,
I got a chance to
yes.
interview Brian a couple of years ago about his book Eat That Frog, which was really cool. And
Oh,
I've interviewed Jarek Robbins, Tony's son, who has his
oh,
own kind of brand, and which is fun. But yeah, all of those people, I mean, they've written such amazing material, and you can use that material to improve your life. And that's why I love people like that. And sometimes there's some scrutiny,
mhm.
Tony Robbins, blah, blah, blah. But I just, I look at those people through such a positive lens.
I do too. As I said, for me, the reason, I mean, I'm 47 now. They were introduced to me in my teenage years. So basically, for the last almost 30 years, I've, no matter what I do or I read or I focus on, usually it's fed by the foundation that they planted back then when I was a teenager, because
Yeah.
that's what I was exposed to, yes, outside of regular academics.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes
Mm,
sense. And for the audience, just a couple of my favorite communication style books. I
yes.
love both of Vanessa Van Edwards' books. She wrote one book called Captivate,
Hmm.
and which is the science of succeeding with people. And then she wrote another book called Cues, which is all about mastering charismatic communication. She
Right.
defines charisma as a blend between warmth cues and competence cues. So if you're too warm, people perceive you as they don't know what they're talking about. And if you're too competent, people perceive you as unapproachable and kind of cold. And so, like, how to
Mm.
balance those as you're speaking. And I love her books. And then also Talk Like Ted by Carmine Gallo is a really good
Oh,
book.
yes. I that one. That yes, for the TED Talks, I have that one too.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a good one.
And the beauty today is that with you can just get an ebook, as you said. You can get an ebook. Think when I was growing up, the book uh, it's called exclusive books back home. Now, yes. Bookstores were far away downtown. You had to, take the bus or the train or whatever. But now, just sitting on my computer, I can buy the book online and literally read it right here. You
Right.
don't have to make the excuse and say, "Oh, when will I get to downtown? Maybe this weekend."
Yeah, it's very true. And you know what's funny? I actually work with a mentor of mine who I see on a weekly basis. He lives in South Africa
Oh,
still, and he told me that Amazon is really only just getting into South Africa right now for the first time as far as print on demand book distribution and
Right.
the ability to deliver. So, yeah, I mean, still
Yeah,
today, I'm
because we
sure.
have our own local, it's called Take a Lot, our own local South African national delivery service, our own Amazon.
Mhm.
But I also heard from my family that Amazon is making its way in. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they'll
Hmm.
just buy the other company. Who knows?
Knowing Jeff Bezos, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Right.
Right. Nick, any last words for someone who wants to use books in order to improve their public speaking skills, just like you did?
Yes, I'll say that books don't bite. You can read them in the privacy of your own home. It's not an intimidating experience. And there are so many people out there who are such wonderful communicators, and they've written about how you can communicate more effectively as well. So, read a good book, use it to improve your life. And here's my saying: the
Mhm.
right book at the right time can change your life, especially if you implement it correctly. So, also make sure to get a copy of Rise of the Reader.
Absolutely. Author of Rise to the Reader, Nick Hutchison. And then please tell us a little bit more. Oh, sorry. Please tell us again about your podcast and where you stream it so that we can listen.
Sure. My podcast is titled Book Thinkers Life Changing Books, and every episode features a world class author where we do a deep dive on their book. So you can, as a listener, sort of use it as a book discovery tool. You can get a little preview, see what it's all about before you buy it. And it streams everywhere that podcasts are streamed, so you can check it out.
Mm-hmm. That was Nick Hutchison, author of Rise of the Reader, founder of Book Thinkers. Thank you so much for being here today. I've learned so much from just listening to you.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate the opportunity. And a big theme in my book as well is gratitude. So I'll just take a moment and say thank you for hosting a great show and for accepting my invitation to come on and speak. And I'm really excited to hear what your audience has to think about it.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here today and for being so kind. Before you go, please give us your website details as well.
How about this? If anybody wants a custom book recommendation from me, like you've heard the
Mhm.
conversation today and you're thinking, yes, I'd like to start reading, but I still don't know where to start, then shoot me a direct message on Instagram at Book Thinkers. That's our most vibrant and active community. And
Right.
tell me about a problem that you're facing or a skill that you want to overcome, and I'll provide a custom book recommendation. And then from there, there are links in our bio where you can learn all about our website and other links and stuff like that. So that's the best place to go is on Instagram.
Book Thinkers on Instagram, and you will get a customized copy from Nick himself. Thank you so much for being here today. This has been amazing. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify, and stay tuned for more episodes to come.